All right, and we are live. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Chris, and this is my channel. We love comics. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to what I have to say. And this is going to be a very important video for anyone who is just starting out in comic books, or even people that may be quote-unquote experts. They may learn a thing or two, because we all can learn from each other. So this may be a very long video, but especially if you're new to comics and you want to ask a question, this could definitely help you. And this is inspired by one of my subscribers who left a comment, which I will read momentarily. But I do want to make sure that I tell people, I always encourage people to come in and basically ask any questions they want. Now, I don't know if you've asked questions on other channels and they didn't take you seriously or thought the question may be beneath them or something like that, but there will be no bad or wrong questions here. So it could be the most simplest question. Please ask it, because the more we learn, the better your comic book experience is going to be. So the one thing I want is, if you do want to ask a question, place it in the live chat in all capital letters. So this way, while I'm scrolling, I can find them easier. So if it's just regular statements, like, for example, Comic Lover Omega and Rayman the Silencer Man, I'll just do it in lower, the lower fonts, so I can see the difference. So let's get into it. So the first thing I want to say is, one of my subscribers who's already here, Rayman the Silencer Man, wrote me a comment yesterday regarding a video I did the other day. So I want to read that, and we're going to start there. And then I already see we have one question, and then we'll go based on the questions. So it'll either be a long video, very detailed, or it will not. That depends on you guys. Okay, so Rayman the Silencer Man said this comment, and I'm just going to abbreviate a little bit. Okay, let's see. Okay, now I know the difference between a cameo and a first appearance. He's regarding to my video I did the other day, when is the best time to buy a comic? And he was not aware of the difference between a cameo and a first appearance, or a full appearance. Okay, so you continue to say, I feel like I am a student and you are the teacher. Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm going to skip a little bit. He says, I have a question for you. Now, you know I haven't collected comic books in over 40 years, except for the ones I got in a box for $50, which was mostly DC back in the fall. So my question is, what is the difference between a variant, and I guess he meant to say, and a regular comic book? I just don't get it, and if they both look the same. Also, what's the difference between a newsstand comic and a regular comic book? Okay, so we're going to stop it right there, and we'll answer those questions first. And again, if you're just coming in and you want to ask a question, just place it in the live chat, put it in all caps so I can see it easier if I see there's a lot of people commenting. So let's first get there. And as you could see, people are already starting to come in. If you want to leave just regular comments and communicate with the people in the live chats, please do. Okay, so the first thing we're going to discuss is the variants. Now, it's very simple what variants are. Variants are a way for the comic book industry and comic book, stores to make a little bit extra money. Now, variants can depend on the amount of purchases you need to make. Now, there are variants that are basically what are called one-in-one variants, which means they will have the regular edition of the comic, and they will just have a generic variant of that comic. The only difference is the cover. Sometimes it's a different artist, sometimes it's, maybe it's a different color. It really does vary. So those really depends on the cover itself. Otherwise, the book inside is exactly the same. So there's nothing really different but the covers. Even with the more rarer comics that are the variants, you'll have what's called maybe a 1 in 10 variant, a 1 in 25 variant, a 1 in 100 variant, etc. The reason for that is a comic book store, let's say, for example, a 1 in 100 variant. That means a comic book store, in order to get one of the 1 in 100 variants, they have to purchase 100 copies of the regular newsstand edition of that comic book. Or, I'm sorry, direct edition of that comic book. So you could see where that could become very expensive for a small comic book shop. Because remember, it's not just that comic they're ordering. They're ordering hundreds of others. So to buy 100 of a regular comic, which may not sell because you're stuck with them, just to get that 1 in 100 variant, I mean, you could sell that for $100, $200, but now you're stuck with probably 80 copies of a book that you'll never be able to sell. So variants are basically a way to make extra money. Some of them are valuable, but for every one that's valuable, there's probably 30 of them that will not see the light of day. I used to collect a lot of the variants back when I first got back into collecting comics back in 2015 to 2016, and then I really saw that they weren't what they were really hyped up to be. And again, like I said, for every one that will make it very valuable, there's going to be plenty that won't. So variants are basically, a lot of people get them because of the covers. Sometimes you have a different artist just with a much prettier variant. Some of them are just gimmicks, like the hip-hop variants and things like that. And again, if you're coming in and asking a question, please try and write it in all caps so I could see it quicker. All right, so let's get into the next question, because this one is very important, and it's very misunderstood, even with people that I've seen collecting comics for a while. And his second question was talking about what is really called newsstand versus direct edition comics. And it can explain why a certain one of those is actually a little bit more valuable. In the beginning, in comic books, they had books that you could return if they were not sold. So if they sent them to stores, like, for example, your local mom and pop stores, or even places like 7-Eleven, things like that, any comic that did not sell could be returned for a full refund. Now, that got very costly to the manufacturers, especially, even big companies like Marvel and DC, because they also even paid to have them shipped back. So there was a lot of money involved that they would lose. So to kind of compensate for the amount of shipping costs, at one point they said, well, you could rip off the top 1/4 of the cover and send that in as proof that you did not sell the comic, and again, you would be compensated. After a while, they decided to get what's called the direct edition, which means you would get the comic book stores in particular, and this started roughly around the 70s because a lot of comic book stores started, coming into the local businesses around the world, that you would get a cheaper price on the purchase of that comic, but you could not return it. So you had two different versions now. You had the newsstand edition and the direct edition. Now, in the beginning, it was hard to tell the difference. That's why if you see, especially in Bronze Age books, you will see a barcode sometimes where there's a line like slanted across it in diagonal. Well, that meant that that book was a direct edition and it could not be returned. So comic book stores were stuck with these books. But what happened is people complained they didn't like that little line that went through the barcode. So they had to find another way that was more eye-appealing to be able to tell the difference. So what they did then is what you see basically around the Copper Age is where you start to see, let's say, like, for example, Amazing Spider-Man 300. You'll see in the bottom left-hand corner, the newsstand edition will have a barcode, and the direct edition, instead of the barcode, would have, for example, like an image of Spider-Man. So you would be able to know the difference. So later on, they changed it a little bit more, because now every now and then it wasn't just Spider-Man. Sometimes they put other images in there. But if it just had the barcode, that was the newsstand edition, which meant they could be returned to whatever, Marvel, DC, or what have you. I don't know if Image did it, but let's just assume the two major ones, Marvel and DC, would refund those. So they would basically just destroy them. So that would reduce the amount of the print run. And with the direct edition, they would get a better amount of prints that they would sell to a comic book store, and those comic book stores would be stuck with them even if they didn't sell. You couldn't return them. Now, later on, in more modern comics, you will still see barcodes. The way you can tell the difference is, let's say, again, Amazing Spider-Man comic. There will be barcodes instead of separating the difference with an image of, like, for example, Spider-Man. They will have, it'll say directly on top of the barcode, direct edition. The one that is a newsstand will just say Amazing Spider-Man. So there is a difference. So now, if you've ever seen somebody on eBay or somebody talk about the value of a comic, you can now kind of get an understanding of why the newsstand editions are so much more valuable, because all of the newsstand editions that did not sell were returned to the companies to be destroyed. So that would reduce the amount of the availability of that comic. So I'm sure there's exceptions to every rule, but the newsstand editions will always have a lower print run than their counterpart, which is the direct edition. Because no matter how many of them are printed, if they printed 1 million of the newsstand and 1 million of the direct edition, and let's say only 500,000 of each sold, well, the direct edition, those comic stores are stuck with those additional 500,000. So there's still 1 million print run. With the newsstand, let's say of those 500,000, let's say 450,000 were returned. So that is 450,000 less of that particular comic. So hopefully that will explain what is the difference and why the newsstand edition tends to be, on average, much more desirable. So great questions. All right, so let's get to the next one. JDog42247. Are Mylars and fullbacks the best protection for your book? Or for your books? Okay. In the simple short answer, yes. But let's get into the details, because there's a lot more to it than what most people talk about. And because I don't subject myself to specific brand loyalty, I'm not going to just blindly say something is absolutely the best or ignore the negative things about it, because a person that's looking to improve their collection or save money or get information is not going to be benefited by somebody just giving a biased opinion based on their love or their hate of something. So as far as Mylars and fullbacks are concerned, are they the best? Yes, they are, because they are a better form of plastics that they use. They are thicker. They have better protection against acidity and breakdown. But there are differences. It is very important that you store your comics correctly. Because, for example, if you have a kitchen cabinet, if you laminate it with a clear coat base protection, that's going to protect it. But if you decide, okay, I'm going to just cut all of my vegetables directly onto that lamination, you're going to scratch it and damage it. So in other words, when it comes to Mylars and fullbacks, they are going to protect your comics better. Now, keep in mind, you are going to pay 2 to 3 times more money. So if you have 50,000 books, you're going to go bankrupt just in the Mylars to protect them. But here's the thing that most people just don't want to seem to talk about. Mylars are great unless you do not store them properly. Now that means you could put your books in the most expensive Mylars and fullbacks, have them sealed, and if you put your comic box next to a radiator where it is subject to temperature changes, you are going to create moisture in that comic, which will over time cause bacteria to form. Now, a lot of this is microscopic, so you're not even going to know it's there. So how you store your comics is just as important as the bag and board that you put them in. Because I have, and unfortunately I shut down my original channel, I had comics that I got back in the 80s, and I put them in just the basic bag and boards, the cheaper versions. But I stored them correctly, and some of them I graded back in 2015, 2016, and they came back between 9.0s and 9.6s. And I bought these directly off the comic book shelves when they were brand new, so I didn't buy them in originally bag and boards. So if you store your comics improperly, it doesn't matter what you put them in. It's almost like saying I bought the best condom in the world, but I put it in my wallet and kept it there for the past 3 years and decided that, well, now I'm going to utilize it, and because it's the best, it's going to work the best. Depends on what you do with it. Another example is, and I see this so many times, even with people that have been collecting comics for 20, 30, 40 years. If you hang your comics up on a wall and your comics are exposed to any amount of sunlight, sunlight will slowly fade away the colors of your comic, reducing its condition. Also, it can create condensation, again, on a microscopic level, inside the bag. Because if you've ever had, for example, a glass of ice water or a can of cold soda, and it's a very hot day, all of a sudden you see moisture on the side of either the glass or the can. That's condensation. So if you have a closed bag and board and you expose it to temperatures that are above a certain amount, very heated temperatures, or direct sunlight, you can create condensation inside the book, inside the bag. You may not notice it, and you may not notice it. It's like watching a tree grow. If you had a baby tree and you moved away and 10 years later you decided to visit that house, you would notice the difference. But if you lived there for 10 years, you're not going to notice the growth. So it is very important to be able to not only protect your comics with the best bags and boards you can afford, but to make sure that you are storing them properly. If you lie them down flat, you are compressing the books. Now, I know people have used examples of people that have had, books where they left them flat and they didn't get destroyed. Well, that's good for them, but that's not something worth taking the chance on, because if you post them all in the same direction, the bottom comics are going to get compressed from the sheer weight of all the books above them. And since the side of the staple is going to have a thicker edge than the other side where you open the book, it's going to be one of the reasons why you see a lot of spine rolls in comic books. So if you want to buy Marlars, what I would recommend is the best ones to use those for are for your most expensive comics, like your Amazing Spider-Man 1s and your, Avengers number 4. But if you're going to spend, because literally you would spend for 100 regular backing boards and bags, for both of those things it would probably cost you around $18 to $20. If you were getting the top shelf Mylars and the top shelf fullbacks, you're talking $50, $60 and up. So if you're like me, who literally has tens of thousands of comic books, I'd go bankrupt. So if you have, for example, Archie Comics number 273, which is valued at 25 cents, why would you want to spend like a total of like $5 to put it in a fullback and board? I mean, you can, and if you have that kind of money, God bless you, but save it for the most expensive books. And again, storage is very important. You don't want to be putting them in an unfinished basement where there's a lot of moisture or there's a lot of bugs, because bugs can chew through plastic. If you've ever seen a video, even with mice, they can bite through plastic, no problem. So even the most expensive Mylar, if you put them in the corner of a basement where there's a lot of fluctuation in temperature and it's dark where, spiders can crawl in and that will attract other bugs and mice can get attracted, start chewing just for the sake of chewing to sharpen their teeth. See, mice don't necessarily chew things just to get to food. A lot of them chew very hard and solid things like wood and plastics to keep their teeth sharpened. So if they see a nice warm comic book box that is dark, is going to be warmer than the outside area, is going to have bugs that they can feed on, they could have a feast chewing on your comics. Another bad place is an attic. because, again, the differences in temperature depending on where you live. So there's a lot more factors than just the actual bag and board. So like I said, 99.9% of my comics are in just the most inexpensive bag and boards. Now, if you have those inexpensive bag and boards, you do have to change them every so amount of years. Now, there are people that say 5 years. Well, that's if you store them improperly. I have books back from the 80s that are still in the original bag and board that I purchased them from, and there is not one bit of wrinkle. Now, if you start to see any kind of wrinkles, you absolutely want to change your bag and board, because what will happen is the acidity is breaking down, because people may not even be aware of this. Your comic box that you buy from the stores and store your comics in, they will emit acid into the air. So if you have, for example, a top loader, and you put your comics in a top loader, you're exposing the top of your comics to the atmosphere, which means bugs and the air and everything will affect it. So even your comic book boxes that you store your comics in have some acidity to them. There are not many people that are aware of that. So be very diligent in how you protect your comics. All right, so let's see. Comic Book Omega says, it's my birthday, and this is a great gift to see a video from my favorite YouTuber. It's not a question, but anyway, happy birthday. All right, let's scroll down. All right, again, if you're just coming in, if you write your questions in all caps, I could see it quicker. All About Comics says, what do you collect? Well, if you watch my videos, you'd know that, but that's okay. I tend to nowadays love to collect key issue comics. In other words, first appearances, #1 issues, ones that are, origins of characters, things like that. To me, it's just very exciting. Like, for example, last year alone, I was able to acquire Fantastic Four #1, Amazing Spider-Man #1, Superman #2, and Avengers #1. And even Incredible Hulk issue #2. So for me, those are very exciting. And to me, there is no wrong way to collect. Collect what you love, whether you collect them because you love to read them, or you collect them because you love the artwork, or you collect them because you want to turn around and flip them and make a nice profit. There's no wrong way to do it. Let's see. Oh, and All About Comics said PM him, and he'll send you a birthday gift. Wow, that was very nice. All right, Michael Santoro says, question. One of my books, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Universe #4, has some wrinkled folding on one corner. Any advice of how to get rid of it? Well, you can absolutely get that comic book pressed. A pressing is basically, think of it like if you've ever gone to a dry cleaning service, they kind of have a machine that they clamp in over the clothes and it cleans the article, the garment. They basically have that with the comics. Now, the only problem is if it has a color break. In other words, let's say, for example, you have a cover that's completely black. If all of a sudden you see a bend and there's a white little indentation along where the fold is, that means it broke the color of the ink. That cannot be fixed. But if you have, like, for example, one of the comics I showed in a video that I sent to PGX, which I should be getting back sometime either late next week or the week after, my Avengers #1 was totally wrinkled on the cover, but a lot of them were not color breaks. So you could press that out and those wrinkles will disappear. Now, there's a lot of different services out there that do pressings, so my advice would be to kind of do your due diligence. Check with other people that have researched with, had their own experience. Check online. I deal with PGX and their pressing services, and so far, knock on wood, I haven't had a problem at all. But there's a lot of different companies out there. I would be cautious with people that basically do it out of their own houses, because you never know how honest they can be. Because just imagine if all of a sudden somebody sent them a Detective Comics 27 that would be, after a pressing, a 9.0. You're talking tens of thousands of dollars, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. Who's to say that person might just disappear with that comic? I would be very wary. At least with a business, you have better protection. So I would stick with a more reputable company, unless it's somebody you know. So, I mean, they even sell comic pressings machines. But it is an art form, and you do have to practice. Don't practice with your Amazing Fantasy 15. Practice with some, 25-cent comic. But you can absolutely press out any kind of wrinkles, and even water stains wrinkles. It may not get rid of the stain itself, but even companies will do what's called a dry cleaning. And this, either pressing or dry cleaning, is not considered restoration. So if you've ever seen, for example, like a purple CGC label that says restoration, restoration is things like gluing the cover back onto the comic book, or trimming the comic book, or maybe using a red magic marker to fill in a little color break. Those are restorations, which will basically lower the value of the comic. But according to all of the major grading companies, if you do a pressing or a dry cleaning, it is not considered restoration. So it can take, like, for example, a 4.0 book, and depending on the reasons, it could all of a sudden come out to be a 5.0, maybe a 5.5, which would dramatically increase the value of the book. Reg 718 says it's not just me, it's we love variants. Yeah, and many people love variants, and if you buy them because you love them, then it doesn't matter the value. Let's see. Michael P says, "Hey Chris, explain the variants directs from late 70s. I'm not sure what you mean, but I did in the beginning of this video talk about the direct edition and the newsstand edition. Maybe that's what you're talking about. Let's see. Yep. All of a sudden it zoomed really far down. Dazzler #1, first direct sales only issue. Yeah, there are exceptions to every rule. Let's see. And also, if you want to communicate with each other, please feel free. Reg 17 says, I use Mylars and fullbacks, no complaints. Absolutely. Like I said, they are very good. You get what you pay for. But again, you have to store them properly. Let's see. Make sure the bottom comics are Superman 75. Yeah, there you go. So if you're going to put comics on the bottom, make sure they're not, it's not your Amazing Fantasy 15, we'll put it that way. All About Comics says, I use top loaders a lot. Well, let me ask you, do you use your top loaders, do you, in other words, put your comic in a bag and board and then put them in a top loader? Or do you take a raw comic and just drop it into a top loader? Because remember, the top is exposed. And if the top is exposed, that means air gets in, bacteria gets in, the weather gets in, bugs get in. So be very careful about just using a quote-unquote naked comic in a top loader alone. But if you're putting it in a bag and board and then putting it in a top loader, that's perfectly fine. Let's see. Rage 718 says, oh my God, somebody put comics next to a radiator, deserves to have damaged comics. You'd be amazed at how some people store their comics. Now, here's another thing that people are misled about. There are people who will tell you that Mylars all have UV ray protection, and that is 100% inaccurate. Not all of the Mylars have UV protection, and even the best ones that do not guarantee 100% UV ray protection. So if you spend your money on the most expensive Mylar that has UV protection and expose your comic to sunlight, it just won't fade as fast as a normal bag and board. But make no mistake, the elements will get into your comics if you do not treat them with respect. And remember, these are pieces of paper. They do not last very long. And what they don't tell you is, yes, they use Mylars in museums to protect things, but they also vacuum seal them to eliminate the atmosphere, to eliminate air. Because if air gets in your comics, then so can bacteria. Because remember, bacteria that will consume those paper are microscopically invisible. You cannot see them, and they're all around your comic book. So the more change of temperature, the more likely your comics will be damaged over time. Okay, so let's see. Every time I scroll, it all of a sudden skips like 50 people, so I apologize about that. Let's see. I have to scroll all the way back up again. Okay, so let's see what else we have. And again, if you're just coming in new, if you want to ask a question, put it in all caps so I could see it better. All right, let's see. Comic Sniper says some rats just want to read my comics. Hey, if, that's being kind to animals if you want to give them something to read, so more power to you. Just make sure they don't turn into Pickle Rick. Okay, what is the purpose of Mylars that are open at the top? Well, basically, they really don't serve any purpose, because like I just said, if they do sell Mylars that don't have the flap that fold over. Well, again, if you buy that and you just spent all of that extra money for these and you have the comic exposed to air, well, like I said, bacteria can get in, things that can eat paper can get in, so they basically don't serve a purpose. So that's why education is key. I understand there are people who absolutely love Mylars, but if you have such brand loyalty to the fact that you think something that you love is 100% right and is never wrong, or see something that you don't like as 100% wrong and never right, well, you're not being not only honest to yourself, but the people who rely on you for truthful information. Now, when I speak about truthful information, that doesn't mean I get everything right. But what I will say is the good and bad of a product, whether I like it or hate it. Because if you're going to do a review, you have to take the bias of your love or hate for something out of the equation. Otherwise, you are only giving a one-dimensional view that will only adhere to people who have the same bias as you. People are not going to learn anything. So you're really doing a disservice to your subscribers or to your fan base by just describing something solely based on your bias towards it. And that's why I totally stress about not really having brand loyalty. I mean, you could like a company or you could like a product, but there is no product pretty much that's 100% perfect, and there is no product that's pretty much 100% bad. Now, of course, there are exceptions to every rule. I mean, if you look up, for example, like so many people hate on PGX because of a certain situation that may or may not have happened. There's rumors on both aspects of what the situation was. But a company can make mistakes. It's what they do now to make up for it. I mean, if you actually Google how many companies today that you are aware of or probably use that actually used to be affiliated with the Nazis, you'd be amazed by how many of them you see that are products that you know today. But because over time they don't discuss it, out of sight, out of mind. So judge a company on not its past, but what its present is. Because companies can make mistakes, and especially if you're an owner of a company and you hire somebody, you can't control what everybody does, but you can control what happens after a situation. So always keep that in mind and keep an open mind. Let's see. Caleb Leyland is here. Sorry I'm late. No need to be sorry. That's okay. Splash Page, Mr. White Gloves, welcome. And he never gives me credit. I'm the one that gave him that name, so don't ever forget that, Mr. Splash Gloves. And I love the fact that you wear your gloves even when you're holding a bag and board. You must have the most acidic fingers in the world. Let's see. Funkoff says, what kind of gloves do you use to read your comics? Most of the time, I don't really use gloves. I basically only really use them for very expensive comics. I actually show ways where you could take a comic out of the bag and board without really using your fingers too much. I mean, newer ones I really don't care about if my fingers touch them. I mean, to each their own. But I do have a pair of gloves that when I did my eBay auctions, my live auctions on my old channel at one point, I actually bought a comic from one of the sellers, and they were nice enough to send me a pair of white gloves, and I thought that was cool. I don't know where they got them, but as long as your fingers cannot have their acid go through them, it should be fine. I just find that when you have these gloves on, they're very slippery, so there's more of a chance you can actually bend the comic trying to get it out of the bag and board. So it's kind of a catch-22. But hey, you do what you love. So Russell Hall says, Chris, do you have a Teenage Mutant #1 from the 80s, first print or otherwise? I do have a Teenage Mutant #1. It's a second print. I wish I had the first print. I'm dying to get one because I love the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. But I do have a second print. It is actually signed and a little Teenage Mutant sketch that one day I will be getting graded. I have issues 1 through 10 all first prints except for number one. But number one, the cheapest I've seen is like $3,000. I'm hoping to one day, find one of those steals I'm fairly famous for. But I would love to get that book. So if anybody has a first print that they want to do a trade, I'd be more than willing to listen. And speaking of trades, especially if I have duplicates of a book, I have no problem with somebody doing a trade with me. As a matter of fact, I'm actually in the I'm doing a trade as we speak. Their comic is in the mail to me, and I have their comic in the mail to them. I've dealt with them before in the past, so I'm looking forward to showing that video. So thank you for that question. I absolutely love the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and I have a video showing my Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle 1 second print if you ever want to see it. So hopefully you'll check that out. All right, Comic Sniper says, what's the best way to spot trimming? Well, the absolute best way is first either do a Google search or a Bing search or Ask search, whatever one. I don't use really Google. And just find out what are the dimensions of the comics that you are buying. Because each age has a different width of the comic. The newer books are a lot smaller than the books from the Golden Age. So find out what the dimensions are of the book. And all you have to do is get a tape measure and actually measure the book. Sometimes you can tell, because if all of a sudden, like especially on the right-hand edge of the comic book, if all of a sudden a character's part of their face is cut off a little bit, that's a key indicator right there. So sometimes it's hard to tell, and sometimes it's flat out easy, because another way you could spot is they end up having it trimmed to where the inside pages are not the same length as the cover and back of the cover. So sometimes you could notice that as well. So the easiest way, and there is a lot of work to it, is to get out a tape measure, measure the comic, and see if that is the exact length of what they are supposed to be. That's why if you look at the bag and boards, there's a different size bag and board for modern age books, silver age books, bronze age books, because they have different widths. So you just got to learn what those are and take the time out to check. So if you're not sure, and that's why I always tell people, especially when you buy on eBay or even with a trade with somebody, if it's not a graded book, if you don't check these things, it's on you. So if you, let's say you bought Fantastic Four #1 on eBay, and you happen to get it for a steal. Let's say you paid $700 for that book, and you're so happy, and you get it, and you just revel in its glory, in its bag and board, and you put it in a cardboard box, and you leave it there for months. And then a year later, you decide, I won the lottery, I got some money, I'm going to go get this book pressed and graded. Only to find out that it comes back restored. Well, if you didn't take the time to check, that's on you. So that's why I always recommend to people, even if it's somebody that has a 100% rating with thousands of ratings, because I've had that happen where people either flat out lie or decide one day I'm just going to no longer be honest or just make a simple mistake. If you don't verify it, it's on you, and you're the one that ends up having the damage. If you do it within the time limit, and that's why I always recommend taking the chance on eBay, with eBay you get a 30-day buyer protection program. And with PayPal, you get a 6-month buyer protection. So it only works if you check within those parameters. If you don't, then that's your own fault. So it doesn't matter if somebody made an honest mistake or flat out lied. If you don't verify by checking your book, you're the one that ends up not being happy. Because I've seen comic book collectors, and I'm talking people that have been doing this for decades, that'll get a book sent in to be graded, and then get a grade lower than they expected. And they're surprised by it. Why? Because they tend to only look at the front of the book and the back of the book. They seem to forget that grading can be as simple as, is there a fingerprint that's visible? Is on page 17, is there a little tear? Are the staples completely silver in color, or are they rusted? Was there an ink stain on page 31? Was there a coupon cut out in the middle of the book? Well, if you didn't check these things and just graded it based on what the front cover looks like, well, you're not completely grading the book properly, and that's why you're surprised at the lower grade. So again, these are all things, if you're going to get your books graded, don't just check the front of the book, the back of the book, the front cover and the back cover on the inside. Check the entire book, because every little crease, every little ink stain, every little fold, every little color break, every little fingerprint will devalue the book. And what you thought may have been a 9.8 could come back a 9.2. So be very careful with your books, especially if you're doing it for the reason of getting them, valued for their money. All right, so unfortunately it's scrolling again, so I have to go back up again. Sorry about that. All right, so we got some good questions here, and hopefully people are learning. And if you appreciate this, thumbs up always help to show support. I see a lot of people here today, and one, Spartan. What's up, my friend? I haven't seen him for a while. Spartan was basically one of the Walking Dead lookalikes. I won't give it away unless he's still doing it and wants to talk about it. That character may or may not be dying soon, but he was always on my live shows. It was always a fun person to have on, and I'm glad you're here, Spartan, so welcome. Spartan says, hey, Chris, hope all is good, enjoying the stream. All is very well, and I'm enjoying it as well, so we got some good questions. Iconic point, and with the internet, compare the book against the pictures. Some trimmers cut close. Yeah, that's another thing. Compare books. If you have two of the same book, compare it. See if it's too long, too short, or if you're not sure, bring it to a comic book store. Depending on how friendly the comic book store owner is, they may check it for you. So there's a lot of ways to do it. So again, if you're just coming in, if you want to ask a question, put it in capitals so I could see it faster. Michael P. says, Chris, in your opinion, how many long boxes can be stacked safely? They say you could stack them on top of each other 3. I wouldn't go that high. As a rule, because this is cardboard and this is not metal, so these things are very fragile, and you're talking not only the thin amount of cardboard around the box, but the amount of comics can weigh it down dramatically. I do not stack my comic book boxes more than 2 at a time. Now, what you can do is almost do like a log cabin kind of thing, where you put 2 down horizontally and then place others on top of it vertically, and then do the opposite. Then you could do a 3rd stack because it's giving a lot more support. But again, if you put too much and over time it compresses your comics, especially on the bottom box, you don't want your most expensive boxes to be placed in there. When I originally back in the 80s stored my comics, I would buy those humongous, those big old trunks that you see, where you just use a key to open it up, and I would store all of my comics, and I would put them not flat down, but straight up, and fill the box with it and close it up. That's ultimately the best protection. But I would recommend not doing more than 2 boxes on top of each other. Anything else, if you stack them too high and you don't stack them properly, what happens if they fall over? What happens if somebody knocks into them? You got to be very careful. Another thing I would highly recommend, that many people do not think about this, especially if you have a house that does not have a 2nd floor or you're storing them in a basement. The last thing you want to do is put your comic book box directly on the floor. Now, even I do that mistake with some of my books that you see when I do the video. The box is behind, but those are like my dollar bin comics, so I don't care if something happens to them. You should always put them on top of maybe a board or 2, because if, God forbid, there is ever a flood, what do you think's going to happen with those cardboard boxes? That's where a lot of people end up with mold on their comic books. So especially in a basement, basements can flood. If you have your box directly on the floor, and God forbid there's a flood, say goodbye to your lower end boxes of comics. But if you put them on like maybe a couple of bricks or a couple pieces of plywood or some 2x4s, well, the higher up they are, the less of a chance that water could potentially damage them. So those are little things to think about. Let's see. Ricky Rodriguez says, what's the best way to display comics? Well, it depends, again, on location. The last thing you want to do is put your comics on a wall where the sunlight can get to them. Because even if you have UV ray protection Mylars, they do not guarantee 100% protection. It just means they won't fade as much. And the funny part is, comic book stores do this all the time. Comic book stores display even some of their most expensive comics on the wall, and there'll be a store window where the light can easily get in. And that will fade your comics over time, which will devalue them, even if they're graded. So let's say you have the only Amazing Spider-Man 300 in a grade 9.9, and you proudly display it on your wall, and the sunlight ends up deteriorating it to the point where the comic fades. That's no longer a 9.9. So be very careful about that. So if you want to display your comics, make sure it's nowhere near sunlight. Make sure it's in a temperature-controlled environment. So it's kind of a catch-22. I know a lot of comics want to be displayed because you're proud of them or you love the artwork. But if you're going to sacrifice their condition just to display them, it's a double-edged sword. So be very careful where you put your comics. Just displaying them to end up potentially having them ruined over time, especially if they're valuable, is not the best way to go. All right, Iconic Point says, best way to display comics is in a room with no sunlight and rotate on a monthly basis to reduce fading. There you go. Great Legend. Hey, Great Legend, good to see you. Thank you for coming here. He says, hello, everyone, so make sure you respond. And anybody out there in this live chat that does do videos, make sure you post a link to your channel. I don't mind helping anybody. Whether you like me or not is irrelevant. I want to help everybody, because even if somebody I don't get along with has a comic book channel, if you can learn from that person, then that benefits us all. So if you have a comic book channel, I don't know how other comic book channels are when it comes to channels, especially ones they don't like. But here, if you want to post a link to your channel or ask people to subscribe, as long as you're not doing it every 3 seconds, by all means, please do. I want to make sure this community works for everybody. So let's see. 6 inches of snow, that's not bad. I live in New York. 6 inches of snow is like a routine. Let's see if we have any more questions. From Heroes to Coins, I like that username. I use black surgical gloves that most tattoo artists use. They have little grips on the fingertips, work great. The problem with those gloves is make sure you have the right gloves, because those can bleed through quite easily, and they could be very acidic. So make sure you check on that rubber that you're using in those surgical gloves. So be careful about that. Let's see. Rayman / the Silencer Man, the one that was the inspiration for this video, says, what's the best way for us to grade our books? Well, I actually have my video that gives my honest opinion of all 3 grading services. The top 3 are, of course, number 1 is CGC. I mean, make no mistakes about that. Then CBCS, and last but not least is PGX. Now, if you want to grade your books just because you want to have them graded and you don't care about really what the grade is and you're not interested in selling them, you just want them encapsulated, well, you would want to go with what would be the most inexpensive and which would be at the faster return. Well, that would be PGX. If you want a book that you absolutely want to return around for the highest possible return value, CGC is the best way to go. So it ultimately is going to depend on the reason. Like, for example, if you have a signed book that you got signed back in 1990, well, the last place you would want to send that book is to CGC, because they would return that with a green label that says writing on the top cover, because they will only deal in witnessed signatures. So if you have a comic book that was already signed, it would be silly to send it to CGC, because you would actually lose money on that, because they do not verify. Now, both CBCS and PGX both do signature verifications. So it will come back not a yellow label, but a red label for CBCS, and like a gold label, unless they've changed it, for PGX. So again, it really depends, and that's why I say I love all 3 companies, and there are good and bad about all 3. You can't say CGC has no faults and they're the best, and you can't say PGX is absolutely horrible, they do nothing right, because again, that's just biased, and you're not looking at it from an outsider's point of view, trying to give a fair and honest review, because again, you're giving a disservice to the people that you are sharing your information with. So I take out that love or hate for a company. I go by what they do, what they have done, and what their strengths and weaknesses are. Because all companies have both strengths and weaknesses, whether you love them or you hate them. Let's see. Splash Page, and he's probably the expert on the gloves department, says, I have used the cotton gloves for so long that I have no problem with them. I'm not wearing gloves on at all by now. So yeah, I can understand that. But yeah, for me, I tried using the whole glove thing. It's just, and I tried to take them out of the boxes. My hands would slip all over the place and everything. But hey, again, there is no wrong way. Somebody might see that and say, oh, that person is a little silly to use gloves all the time. But if it works for him, then there's nothing wrong with it. So, again, don't let other people, because unfortunately in any community, there are sometimes going to be what I like to call the elitist group that look down on everybody else. And that's why I make videos like this, because I want you to ask the most basic question that you may have been afraid to ask someone else, because somebody that's been collecting comics for 50 years might laugh at somebody saying, oh, well, what's the difference between a newsstand and direct edition? Well, how do you learn if you don't ask questions? And how do you improve yourself if you don't ever learn those questions because you're afraid to ask them? So here you can ask any question, the most basic question. You will not be made fun of. You will not be looked down upon, because today could be your first day. And if you came in with such enthusiasm saying, oh, I saw a couple of comic book videos. It inspired me to get my first comic. I want to share it with the world, and I'm excited that I got Spider-Man issue #1 from the 1990s. And I think, oh, I'm going to go to college with the money I'm going to make on that. And then all of a sudden you show it to somebody and a whole bunch of people laugh at you and make fun of you and saying, oh, how did you not know that that book is worth like $5? Well, you're going to feel turned off. You might never collect another comic again. We don't want to give, especially the new people, a bad experience. And trust me, I know what that's like when I came into this community with my original channel. I was different. I may have not done everything the right way, but everybody has the right to their own opinion. So ask the questions. And if somebody asks you a silly question, if you're one of those people that makes comic book videos and somebody asks you what would be the most simplest, basic question for you, never assume that they know what you know. Because especially like the video I did the other day about the Fantastic Four 52 reprint, somebody like myself and others who have been collecting comics like Splash Page and even the Great Contender, Russell Hall, the people that have been collecting for a while would know that, well, there's no 12-cent price on the cover, so that would be the first indication that that is a reprint, even without seeing the barcode on the back of the book. But a person that's only been collecting for a week, a month, a year, a day, they will not know that. So what's simple to us is only simple to us because we've had the time and the experience placed in to learn those things. So we have to remember there are new people, and we as comic book creators, in other words, as far as channels are concerned, we should be excited every time a new person says, today is the first day I'm getting into comic books, because maybe a video that you did or I did inspired them to not only buy their first comic, but continue to put money into the industry, which keeps what we love alive. When we all fight amongst ourselves, we all hate amongst ourselves and gang up on one another and do those ridiculous things, all it does is it pushes away the newer fans to maybe never want to get involved, which ultimately in the end damages our industry as a whole that we love. And to me, that is why I shut down the original channel, waited about a year to come back, and when I came back, as you notice, I don't have the live shows where I invite people anymore. And you notice there is no more drama. And actually, I've had people that I've had issues with actually contact me, and I won't mention any names here unless they want to be known, but actually wanted to create a piece and apologize for their part. And I think that's great, and that's what we need. So my opinions may be different from others. It doesn't make mine right, doesn't make theirs wrong. It's just an opinion. So value yours and never be afraid to ask a question. And if you go to a place where you ask a question and they make you feel belittled because of it, then that is not part of a community you want to associate with. Come to channels like mine, and I'm sure there's plenty of others that will answer the question. I guarantee you, if you ask Splash Page Comics a basic question about a comic book, he's going to answer it. So go to the right people. But let's all try and make sure this is a community that works together. Doesn't mean we all have to hug each other and sing Kumbaya. It just means the better we are to helping others and helping each other, the more we help the comic book industry as a whole. We should be representatives for the things that we love, not little cliques from here and there that have these little childish spats. Those days are gone, at least for me. So let's get back into it. That was my little rant. I'll see if you have any questions. Splash Comic says it's an OCD thing. Yeah, I remember that when you used to be on the live shows. We used to talk about that. And I still remember the day that in the background when I used to do this thing, and maybe someday I'll bring it back, where I did these live shows where I forget what I called it, but basically it would almost be like a, what was it? Where I'd mention, okay, find comic whatever, or find a comic with a certain cover on it, and people would go running and try and find things. Or I said, all right, the first person that grabs a pencil, and they'd run all over the place. One of my, that used to be a subscriber that supposedly doesn't like me anymore for some reason, he actually crashed through a door live on the live show, which is hysterical. But there was one where Splash Page Comics, Mr. White Gloves, you just see him in the background. He falls over, and he does what looks like a Superman fly-off into the atmosphere. And I remember that video. It's like times like that I wish I didn't shut the channel down. But that was the most hysterical thing I've ever seen. And to this day, I still remember you in slow motion flying through the air in the background. It was like a 2-second shot, but those were the days. That's the things I do miss. But yeah, he has mentioned it's an OCD thing, and that's okay. Nothing wrong with that. All right, let's see. See if we have any more questions. Reaper Tate gave a review for those new plastic short boxes. They look awesome, but the price is a little steep. Yeah, but it's like anything. You're going to get what you pay for. A Mercedes is going to be a lot more expensive than a Hyundai, but you're going to get a lot better features with the Mercedes. So a plastic short box is not going to have the same problems as cardboard. It's definitely going to have more support, but you're going to have to pay for that. So, there's always, like I said, a good and plus for everything. If you're a millionaire or you make $100,000 a year, and you can spend extra money on all these things, more power to you. But if you're somebody that's struggling financially, you may not have that ability. So you do what's best. So, never feel bad if you're the person that isn't wearing the expensive clothes and you have to wear the cheapest ones, because it's better than walking around naked, because, like they say, it's not polite to point. So let's see if we have any other questions. Splash Page Comics says, vacuum pack the long boxes is what I do. That is something that you can do. You can also, a cheaper way to do it is if you get those, you could seal off the box using tape and then use those little packages, I forget what they're called, but they suck out the air and moisture. You can also put a little bag of rice, because bags of rice actually absorb moisture in the air. That's why if you've ever seen an old video about if your cell phone ever got water in the battery, all you have to do is take the battery out and place it in a bowl of rice, and it will absorb all of the water. So that's another little thing that you can do. Let's see. Derek Garcia says, have you seen the new BCW Heavy Duty comic bin? Any thoughts? I haven't seen them yet. I'll have to check into it. But I'm assuming if they're new and they have more support, then that's a good thing. I'm sure they'll be more expensive. I mean, you could use a dresser drawer if it fits the comics right. You could make your own. There are actually people I've seen on YouTube that have made videos teaching you how to make your own storage boxes. So if you make them, for example, out of wood and you protect them, it's going to have a lot more support. So I have not seen them yet. If anybody has experienced them, let me know what your experiences is. But a lot of times it's based on your own personal experience. And again, it scrolled on me. So again, if you're just coming in now, if you want to ask a question, just put it in capital so I can see it. There are no bad questions. Unless you're saying something rude, then yes, there would be a bad question. Let's see. Contender, for a future video, can you do a room tour of your comics? My room tour would be very boring because they're all in comic boxes. I don't display anything out because, again, I want to keep them away from the atmosphere and keep them very protected. So, especially my more expensive comics, because my house got robbed years ago, all of my major expensive comics that you see in the videos, I take and place into a storage facility. So they're in a storage place. They're not displayed. I don't display them because, again, if you put them out in the sunlight or expose them to potential bugs or rodents, luckily I don't have rodents, but you never know, I don't display them. So a room tour of my comics would be very boring because you'd see a bunch of comic boxes. But, yeah, thank you for that question anyway. Let's see. Russell Hall says, Chris, I would buy Royal Rumble #1 from Boom Studios, and I believe one story was written by AJ Styles, which I think is the first time a WWE wrestler writing for a comic has some variants. Not really much into the wrestling, but if anybody out there is into wrestling, check out that book from Boom Studios. And I appreciate the recommendation because even if I don't take it, if somebody else enjoys it and they weren't aware of it, that's always appreciated. Let's see. Alex says, I love your analogies, Chris. Thank you. I try and do that because it makes it very easy to explain things at times. Let's see. And again, if you've never been to my channel before, check out some of my other videos. Hit subscribe if you haven't. And if I don't see any more questions, we can end this now. So I'll give a couple of minutes and if somebody wants to make a question. We just had one come up now. Derek Garcia says, what current series are you reading from the big two? My new subscriptions basically ended back around 2016. I used to collect and read a lot of the newer books, but recently with all of the reboots they've been doing and with all the changes of some of my favorite characters, like, for me, Iron Man is supposed to be Iron Man, not Iron Woman, if you know what I mean. I mean, there's nothing wrong with having an additional character, but to replace the characters that I loved with characters that I'm not familiar with, after a while started getting annoying, and a lot of what they call the SJW kind of movements kind of turned me and many people off. So the only comics I currently have that are new are the Rick and Morty. I have the entire series, except for the first print of issues 3, 4, and 5. So if anybody has the first print of the Rick and Morty issues 3, 4, and 5 and want to do a trade, I'd be more than willing to listen. But I have the complete run, and also the other is Walking Dead, because I have the complete run all the way down to issue 100. I was actually lucky enough to get issues 1 through, I think at the time, like 146, which had a signed issue 1 and a signed issue 7, and I only paid $3,000 including shipping for the entire set. So I thought that was a great deal. So those are the only two I read, and I know a lot of people that got turned off by the newer stuff. So that's why now I currently just really go for like the Silver Age, Golden Age, Bronze Age key issues. That's where my excitement is nowadays. So, of course, if you love the new books and they are perfectly fine with you, I've heard a lot of good things about some of the DC books lately. Again, there is no wrong way as long as it makes you happy. So thank you for that question. Pages, Films, and Plastigos, Mr. Angel Vargas. Do you collect anything else other than comic books, like, for example, action figures? That's a good question. I actually am going to be doing a video soon that basically is like a tag video of, show us your collections outside of comics. I love collecting coins. I have been collecting coins since I was a kid, old coins, and I was majorly into coin collecting around 2008. I bought my first gold coin. It was a 1/10 ounce gold eagle that I bought for $90. That was graded ICG, MS 70. And I paid, like I said, about $90 for it. I wish I would have known then what I know now. I would have bought a lot more of them. But I have like thousands of ounces of silver and about 20 of gold. I have a lot of graded coins and everything. I used to collect a lot of Star Wars figures, but a lot of those got stolen when my house got robbed. But I still have some left, like the 90s versions of them, all still in their encasements. I've collected baseball cards since I was a kid. I stopped that again in the 90s when they were really just overdoing it with all the special variants that were coming out and things like that. But I mainly nowadays collect mostly comics, but I love collecting the gold and silver coins, old coins. I have coins that date back to like the mid 1800s. And I also collect unopened like beer and wine bottles. As a matter of fact, one of my videos that's on here, in the comics section of eBay, somebody was selling a bottle of Dom Perignon champagne unopened. And I think I won it for like $20 because no one bid on it. Because how many people are looking for a bottle of Dom Perignon unopened on a comic book section of the eBay? And I ended up winning it. So I have a couple of bottles, like beer bottles and old like wine bottles from like the 70s that have never been opened. I don't know if they have any value, but to me, I think it's cool to have something that, nobody probably has or has very little of. So if you have any other collections that you guys like, please post them in the comment section, whether this is live or later on. Caleb Leland, and thank you for that question. That's a great question. Let's see. Caleb Leland, does anyone here use those little dehumidifiers? That can help. But again, it's not going to cure everything. It will help. And something is always better than nothing. But again, if you need a dehumidifier, that means the area that you're putting them in has a temperature that you may want to avoid. So again, just be very careful where you store your comics. All right, so it's scrolled up again. Okay, so let's continue. All right, Alexis says, hey, Chris, can you touch on collecting lower grades? I feel that some people shy away from that. Absolutely. If you watch my videos, you'll see a lot of my comics are lower grade. Now, the main benefit of a lower grade comic is you will be able to buy a more affordable version of the comic. Because, let's face it, everybody would love to have a 9.8 Amazing Fantasy 15. I don't think there is one that exists, but let's say that there was one that existed. You're not getting that for a cheap price. If there was a 9.8 Amazing Fantasy 15, it would probably sell for $1 million or close to it. Well, a 0.5 would probably be about $6,000. Which is still expensive, but dramatically lower. So you can apply that to other comics. See, when it comes to lower grades, when it comes to key issues from like the Silver and Golden Age, I don't mind them. Even sometimes the Bronze Age. What I will not do is waste my money on a lower grade modern book. Like, for example, if you have a first appearance of Deadpool, New Mutants 98, and it's a 5.0, hardly anybody's going to touch that, and you're not going to get much retail on it. But again, if you're buying a book because you want to own it, I have, like, for example, I've said before, and even in this video, I have a Fantastic Four issue number 1 that is graded a 0.5, that is a purple label from CGC because it has a facsimile cover. Well, I spent under $400 for that book, or around $400 for that book. A 0.5 goes for a couple of $1,000. As of now, I couldn't afford that. I also have an Amazing Spider-Man issue number 1, again with a facsimile cover. A 0.5 of that book, again, a couple of $1,000. I paid around $350 for that book. It had the story completely intact, just had a facsimile cover. I also recently, at the end of December, purchased a Superman issue number 2, again with the facsimile cover. That book in a 0.5 is, again, multiple thousands of dollars. I spent around $250 for that book. So lower grades are great if you cannot afford to get a higher grade. Because back in the 80s, I spent like $70 on a Hulk 181 that would have been a 9.2 to a 9.4. I bought what would have been easily a 9.6, if not a 9.8, Conan number 1. I had a Amazing Spider-Man issue number 9, which is the first appearance of Electro, would have easily been a 9.4 to a 9.6 that I only spent $125 on, and I was nervous at the time when I bought it because it was the most expensive comic I ever purchased. So everybody would love to have higher grades, but if that Amazing Spider-Man number 9, 9.4 was listed today, you're talking $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 for that book. I spent $125. Unfortunately, it's one of the books that got stolen from me. But I can't afford a $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 book as of now. Even if I win the lottery, hey, why not? More power to me then. But to me, a lower grade is beneficial because I can say I own the first appearance, well, the second appearance of Amazing Spider-Man. I own Amazing Spider-Man #1. I can say I own the first appearance of the Fantastic Four. Well, if I didn't get the book because I couldn't afford a higher grade, well, then I don't have it. Now, there are plenty of people out there that will only buy and save their money for a higher grade book. And again, there's no wrong way to collect. So if they feel they have to have a high grade book or they won't get it at all, that's fine. But I love people like that because people like that are not going to be bidding on the lower grade books, which means I can get the lower grade books for a much cheaper price. So again, I would love to get the best quality comic, but you have to go with what you afford. And that doesn't mean you can't make money on a lower grade book. Because, like, for example, if I have Action Comics number 252, I paid, I forget what it is, but the 252, I think I spent like $580 for it. If it comes back a 1.0, I've already made more than what I paid for it in its value. And it's probably going to come back around a 1.5 to maybe a 1.8. So you can make money if you're turning around and selling them on lower grade books because, number one, you'll sell them faster. Because if you have a 9.0 Amazing Fantasy 15, you could sell that for a lot of money, but you're not going to have a lot of bidders. There's not going to be a lot of people that can afford that. So you may have a harder time being able to sell it. For example, there's an auction on eBay where they are selling, Superman 1 through 5. I've seen that auction on there for years now. So yes, those are very expensive comics, and they are in pretty decent grades for the year of the book. But not many people can afford $150,000, $250,000, $500,000 for an auction. But they can afford a $100, $200, $300 version. So lower books will sell faster if they are a desired book. If you have, for example, the first full appearance of Gambit, and you have it as a 5.0, good luck selling that. And you probably spent, if you bought it at cover price, which was, I think, about $1.50 or $1.25, and you turn around and it ends up a 5.0 because you never stored it properly and it ripped or your cat teared it apart or whatever, and you managed to sell it for $40, well, you made a $39 profit on a book. So it really depends on what your purpose is. If your purpose is just to read it, then who cares about the condition? So there's many reasons, but that's a great question. So there's nothing wrong when it comes with lower grades. So hopefully that answers your question, because I see here that you wrote, where is it? You weren't sure if your question went through. Hopefully you heard it. But I guess we'll find out. You can always watch it recently. I have to scroll up again because it keeps scrolling. All right, let's see what other questions we have. And again, if you're just coming in, if you write it in caps, I can actually see it faster. Okay, so Funk Off, I love that. Say that 10 times fast. How do you go about getting your books signed at conventions? Well, the key is to go to them. I haven't been to a comic book convention since the 1990s. And basically, when I got my books signed, I just got the books, waited online, and had them signed. There are plenty of people out there that you could mail your comics to that will sign the books for you. I would make sure I know that person before I do that. But absolutely one of the best ways is to just go there yourself, bring your books. Now, me personally, I have never had more than 5 books for a person to sign. On average, I probably had maybe 2 or 3. I was never that person that would put a stack of 10, 20 comic books and have a person sign. Because when you're talking hundreds of people waiting online for a particular, artist, that to me, that's just rude. So, be considerate and bring maybe between 3 and 5 books to have somebody sign. But the best way is to do it yourself. Because like they say, if you want something done right, do it yourself. Because even if you send it to a friend or somebody that you know on YouTube or Facebook, they're not going to treat your book in the same way that you would treat your book. So if you leave it in the hands of somebody else, they're not going to take care of it as well as you would take care of it. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to throw it in the garbage or steal it, although it has happened, I've heard, unfortunately. But they're not going to treat them like you would. So my best advice is to do things yourself. And you could learn about comic conventions in your area by asking your local comic book stores or just Googling it or using Bing or whatever you use. All right, so let's see. Iconic Point says, low grade is better than no grade. Found a Jimmy Olsen 135 in a $2 bin that was passed by hundreds of people because of the grade. I can have the second appearance of Darkseid. And yeah, there you go. So again, each person's different. Not everybody is going to think that same way. But if it works for you and you can get a book that you might not have been able to afford, or, I mean, to me, I wouldn't have passed up that deal either. To get the second appearance of Darkseid for $2, even in lower grade, that's fine. But again, it depends on why you're doing it. Because like I said before, even if you buy a lower grade, if it's a very desired book, you could still get a lot of money for it. So it just depends on how much you're willing to spend. And I have videos that teach you how you can, save money on buying your comics, doing it the right way. And a lot of it is having knowledge about what you're purchasing. So there are no more questions. We had a lot of people that participated in this, so I'm going to end the video here. If there are questions that end up not being answered, or you came in too late, maybe I'll do this again. Just let me know if anybody wants that. I want to thank each and every one of you that took the time to have a conversation in the live chat. I should post it as you can see it, so even if you're not watching this live, you could scroll and watch the live chat. Everybody is respectful. Everybody is kind. Everybody communicates with one another, and that's at least what I want on my channel. Not everything has to be said right. Not everything has to be done perfectly. Not everything has to be agreed upon. But what should happen is, even if we disagree, we could find an intelligent and intellectual and friendly way to show each other's viewpoints so we all work together. And Ray Man, the Silencer Man, says, Chris, this is my first live chat. Thank you very much. And I want to thank you because you were the inspiration for this. I hope you had a great time. And what I want you to do, get ready with the keyboards because I want you to follow the slogan because you should all know it for now. And Michael P. said, I met Roy Thomas last year. He's a true gentleman and signed for free, but I asked for a donation. He signed 2 books for me. I don't know why that's not showing it, but I'm going to show that. He said, I gave him $20. Others abused the offer. Yeah, there are people that will always take advantage of circumstances. And, karma has a way of finding people. So, I always say try and do the right thing. It doesn't mean you're not going to make mistakes or do something wrong, but it's like anything in life. Everybody makes mistakes. Everybody does things wrong. It's what you do afterwards that determines what type of person you are going to be, not what type of person you may have been. So get your keyboards ready and follow me, and let's see if you know the answer. And I know if you've subscribed to my channel, you already know. It's not you. It's not I. It's what? Let's see how fast you guys can do it. The first person gets a shout out. It's not you, it's not I, it's, finish the sentence, Mr. White Gloves. All right, there we go. Comic Lover Omega got it right. It is We Love Comics, and I always appreciate you guys. I want this to be fun. I appreciate every one of you. It's a lot of good time. Russell Hall, I'm going to give shout-outs for everybody that says it. So we got Russell Hall, got the answer right. Alex got the answer right. R. Wheatley 0206 got the answer right. Kevin got it 1/3 right. So I'll say instead of Kevin R, I'll say his name is Key. So yes, it's not you, it's not I, it's We Love Comics. I want this to be a fun place. I mean, the old drama of the old channel is gone. What other people think, that's on them. I don't care about what anger has to be. This is all about having fun, the love of comics. Hopefully it did answer your questions. If it answered any of the questions, please give it a thumbs up. Please share it, and please keep coming back. Michael P. just said we, so his name is me. And Ray Man, the Silencer Man, says we love comic. He was almost there, so we're going to say Ray Man, the Silencer Ma. So because we almost got it right, we'll leave the last letter out. But that's all right. You guys know the deal, and I do this because I want it to be fun. Hopefully you had fun. Hopefully you learned something. Hopefully you will subscribe, and hopefully you will not hit the person next to you because we know that's not nice. So thanks for listening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for making this a fun time around, and we'll do this again soon. Have a great night, and I'll see you next video. In goes the Zoom.